Welcome to the Halacha podcast Laman Yishmu with Harav Yosef Yeshaya Braun, Mara Da'asra, and a member of the Crown Heights Beis Din. This podcast is brought to you by the Ask the Rav platform in partnership with Laman Yilmedu, the premier institute for practical halacha learning.
Welcome to our next installment of Laman Yilmedu in partnership with Ask the Rav. We have quite a few interesting questions in this podcast, and let's get through to them one after another. So, one question that I received mamash recently, I received a similar question a couple of years ago, but now this question came up again, and we're learning now all about the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. And the question I was asked was, will the third Beis Hamikdash have modern day inventions, central air conditioning, heating, Wi-Fi, electric lights, sound systems, elevators, all of that kind of stuff? So, the short answer is, I don't know. It's very possible. We will wait and see, and we'll find out if that's what's going to happen. Chazal tell us about quite a few questions that are asked in the Gemara about what will happen when Mashiach comes. When he will come, Moshe and Aaron will be with us, and they'll teach us exactly what to do. But we will explore what the potential possible questions. I want to start with one of the issues and move on from there to the general issue about inventions in general. The issue about underground heating specifically, I will mention, that has to do with there are two questions. One is, are you allowed to make a change to the structure of the Beis Hamikdash? And another part of the question is about heating in a shul. There were shuls in the past that had a custom not to allow heating in a shul. Some poskim, however, prefer to have underground heating in the shul, and that has a lot of bearing on the Beis Hamikdash. So let's go. The Beis Hamikdash did have heating, but that was not in the non-holy section. Let's go to the details. So we have a general halacha that we know the Har Habayis is supposed to be hollow, and we need to, because of tumah, so there shouldn't be any issues of tumah. Har Habayis was hollow. Is a discussion that we need to understand about the mechilos, the tunnels underneath the Beis Hamikdash, what level of kedusha they had underneath the floor, if it has kedusha, if it doesn't have kedusha, which is a very, very fascinating sugya about the level of kedusha it has. The other issue that we need to talk about is the rule of hakol bichsav. The pasuk says about the Beis Hamikdash, hakol bichsav miyad Hashem alai hiskel. Everything was given in writing. There was a Megillas Beis Hamikdash, a particular scroll that was given from generation to generation, how the Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be. And as part of the rule of hakol bichsav, the Gemara says in a few places you can't make any changes to the Beis Hamikdash because of hakol bichsav. Now this rule applies to the first Beis Hamikdash, to the second, and it clearly applies to the third. The Rambam talks about this clearly as an introduction to Masech Beis Hamikdash, and he brings the principle of hakol bichsav, how it relates to the Beis Hamikdash. So, if the Chassam Sofer writes that Moshe Rabbeinu was told in advance about all three Batei Mikdash, and this was given over B'Nevuah how they should be, because otherwise anything that you do will be considered a change. So if there's a rule of hakol bichsav, the question is whether that rule applies. There's a discussion if it applies on the entire Har Habayis, does it apply on the ground, does it apply underground? Strengthening the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash, is that an issue of hakol bichsav? Yoshiyahu, the king took the Aron and he hid it underneath the tunnels. There's a discussion if that's also a violation of the rule of hakol bichsav. One possible heter we can have is that there's a svad of the Marsha, that Marsha says they made mechitzas in the Beis Hamikdash during Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. The Gemara actually talks about how they were allowed to make those changes, and the Gemara says they found a pasuk to teach us the idea that you can't have the mingling and visibility of men and women together at the same time. And the Marsha explains this was done in order to protect people from doing the wrong thing. It's not for the purpose of the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it's not an issue. And that perhaps would imply if it's not done for the Beis Hamikdash purpose, so it's for external stuff. It's not for the avodah. The Rabbi Moshe Feinstein writes that according to some opinions, the soirig was a fence around the Beis Hamikdash, and it was there so people shouldn't carry on Shabbos. So that's not a problem of making changes because it's to protect from doing the wrong thing. It has nothing to do with the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. The problem is there's some clear Gemara. So Moshe himself brings a Gemara about doing kiss. They wanted to add earth for kissy hadam. There's a Gemara that talks about putting salt on the ramp so people shouldn't slip. And the Gemara talks about that you can't do it because of a concern of hakol bichsav. So those things perhaps are called for the avodah. So we have to identify what's called soirech avodah and what's not soirech avodah. It's not clear. There's an argument we could say that hakol bichsav does not apply only if something which has to dafka be a certain way. So whenever things have to dafka be a certain way, you can't make any changes. But other outside beauty stuff maybe is not an issue. Another svara I will mention, there's a ritva that seems to imply that hakol bichsav only applies once the structure has been made. In the beginning, when you start the structure, you could make changes. And that, if we take that approach, so make the Beis Hamikdash to begin with the underground heating. As you build it, don't add anything later and change the structure, and that should work. But then that's not very clear. That's a one svara of a ritva. If we talk about heating specifically, there's a fascinating story with Meir Shapiro. He was a Rav in Petrikov, and in his town there was a shul called the Kalt. The shul was very cold, and there was always a concern people during the winter going to go daven elsewhere, and it became a discussion. Maybe they should finally we can get heating in the shul. But first, Gabi went to talk to the Rav, and the Rav said he has to think about it. And he wasn't sure if he should. He should making a change in the structure of the shul. And he went to the Charkover Rebbe, the Stroll Charkover, and he was thinking maybe discussing with the Charkover Rebbe. And as he comes to the Charkover Rebbe, and he comes to the Tish, the Charkover invited to sit next to him, he says, "What's your plans for the winter? It's going to be cold. People are going to leave the shul. What's your plans?" He couldn't believe it. The Charkover Rebbe was immediately catching on exactly what's in his mind. He started stuttering and saying, "Well, actually, that's what I came to the Rebbe to discuss." So the Rebbe said, "I want to hear what you said." So he says, "I'm thinking that you should not put in ovens and heating elements in the shul." And his reason is because in the Beis Hamikdash it says about the Kohen Gadol, that the Kohen Gadol couldn't be part of the Sanhedrin deciding the Iber Hashana, because the Kohen Gadol had a very cold Yom Kippur going to the mikveh 5 times, and he might, if he will sit on the Bezdin that determines the length of the year and whether to add another extra month to make a leap year or not, that will determine the weather on Yom Kippur, which will affect his judgment. He might consider making the year in such a way that Yom Kippur should be warmer, so he shouldn't have to go to a cold mikveh. So Rabbi Shapiro said, 1 second, but they could get ovens and heat up the place. So clearly there's a problem with having ovens. The Charkover Rebbe told him, "I'm very happy with your psak. You paskin correctly, they shouldn't introduce heating in the shul." When the Charkover Rebbe went out, he told Rabbi Shapiro left the Charkover Rebbe, he told his children about the Ruach HaKodesh of their father, that he immediately thought of the question that he was thinking. But then he said, "I'm not a chassid shoita. I don't fall for Ruach HaKodesh." No, the Rebbe thought it's coming winter. He thought a Rav is coming. He's probably going to ask a question about the shul. He thought of that. But if the Rebbe has such a good guess, then he's a good Rebbe. I would like to go to such a Rebbe that always guesses it the right way. That's that story. Going back to the question about changes in the Beis Hamikdash, if we talk about other changes, like having a sound system or things like that, we could take into account the shit of the yadayim. The yadayim says that hakol bichsav is only something which is attached. Anything which is not connected, not mechuber, tolush, is no issue of hakol bichsav making changes. There is a similar discussion about the bichsav eitz. In the year of hakol, they would make a platform, and some achronim write that this platform, since it's a movable platform, it's not a problem of hakol bichsav of making a change in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, but that platform was only there on a temporary basis. If we put a system in the Beis Hamikdash which is there on a permanent basis, even if it's not connected, that might be an issue. There are other arguments about the reason of the bima shel eitz for hakol. There's also a svara that anything which is not part of the structure, it's a side thing, it's not there for part of the structure, it's external, it's on the outside. But the general theme of making changes in the Beis Hamikdash using modern technology, obviously modern technology is there for Kedusha and for the Beis Hamikdash. The world didn't deserve to have gold, and the reason we have gold is for the Mishkan. All this modern technology is there to serve Hashem, and certainly for the Beis Hamikdash. We have in the Mishnah that the Ben Katan made 12 different ways to get water out of the kiyar. There was originally only 2. He made a whole wheel so there shouldn't be a problem of the water staying overnight in the kiyar. Mumbaz HaMelech made the handles of the dishes on Yom Kippur all gold. There was a tavla shel zav, Hilni HaMalka made a bunch of things that were made over the years. They took the flute that they sang the Beis Hamikdash, they covered it with gold so it should be nicer. And Achronim right is he's supposed to improve and always make better the Beis Hamikdash. So the concept of the modern technology itself per se wouldn't be an issue. So the short answer, as we said before, is we don't know.
A brief ad, and we'll be right back to the podcast. Already have smicha? Now it's time to fulfill the Rebbe's hurrah to receive yadayim certification. Join the Dayanis program with the renowned Maggid Shir Rabbi Tuvia Kasimov and gain the knowledge and training to rule on real-life questions. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Sign up today at lamanyilmedu.com.
Let me go to a different topic altogether. I received the following question. In Hayom Yom it is written about minich haba, when we wash our bread, we wash 3 times for bread on one hand and 3 times on the other hand, and the third time when we wash, we leave a bit of extra water in the final wash, and we use that water to rub our hands together. And the question was that only for bread, or is it any other washing? The answer is, anytime you wash on your sale, netilas, yadayim, and also when you wash before davening. Why am I saying, for washing for bread, we have the clearly halacha, you're supposed to rub your hands. Rubbing your hands for washing for davening is found in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. There's a machlokes whether you should make a bracha every time you wash your hands for davening. We don't because of a suffix. But conceptually, it's the idea of washing, which, according to one opinion, you actually mechuyev to make a bracha. And Alter Rebbe clearly writes to rub your hands, to be mekayim the pasuk of erchatz b'nikoy and kapay. Now, when you read Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it could imply that the reason you're rubbing your hands is because one opinion says to wash your hand all the way till the arm, and one says just where to the end of the fingers. You want to be yoytz. The other opinion, add a bit of water and rub your hands. That's how you could learn pshat in Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch. In the Siddur, however, you could learn pshat differently. The implication of the Siddur is purely just for extra tara, you continue rubbing your hands. But klal, the idea of rubbing your hands is in order to do an extra purity, erchatz b'nikoyin. Not the word, focus not on the word kapay, there should be the whole hand, but nikoyin, it creates more cleanliness when you rub the hands together. What about washing in the morning? Now, in Shulchan Aruch and the Siddur, it doesn't mention to rub your hands when you wash in the morning, but it is clearly mentioned in Kizva Rizal. We have Reb Chaim Vital wrote a sefer called Shalak Havanas. Over there he doesn't mention it, but he wrote another sefer called Oilas Tamid, which is after the Shalak Havanas, and over there it's clearly mentioned. It's mentioned in Pri Eitz Chaim, which is also manuscripts of Talmud Arizal, although it's not directly for Reb Chaim Vital. It's mentioned in so many Siddur Arizal and Mishas Chasidim, Reb Shalom Sharabi, you name it. So I saw one of the modern day Achronim write that nobody says to rub your hands when you wash in the morning, when you wake up, but clearly he didn't know that it says this in all these various different Kizva Arizal. So the first time you're washing by your bed, you don't necessarily have to rub your hands then, but the second time when you're washing and you're making a bracha, you should really rub your hands then for the washing. When you're washing, however, for stam for cleanliness, because of ruach ra, every time you wash your hands, so you touch this, you touch that, you come out of the bathroom, then obviously you don't have to rub your hands. The rubbing your hands is when the person washes something which is a proper chiyuv gomer midrabanan, a proper obligation to go wash your hands. In those washings, we should also rub our hands as well. Different question in Hilchos Shabbos, and I have a couple of questions here in Hilchos Shabbos, and I hope we can go through all of them. So I will receive the following question. Somebody wants to go and put chalas wrapped in aluminum foil on top of their cholent crockpot. So I have a cholent, a fully cooked cholent, and on top of the cholent, I want to place chalas wrapped in aluminum foil. Now, there's an issue of bishul, of cooking. Well, the challah was baked already before. It's not wet. It's absolutely dry. There's no concern of reheating it. The reason this could be a problem is because we have an issue called hatmana. Hatmana means not to have something insulated. Now, these chalas are wrapped in silver foil, aluminum foil. So if I'm putting them on top of the cholent pot and it's wrapped, would that be a problem? So it really depends why we're putting the wrapping around the chalas. Are we doing it in order to preserve or add heat? Or we're doing it because we want to keep the blech clean. We want to make sure that the chalas do not dry out. If it's being done in a way because not to retain the heat, to keep the chalas from drying out, that's not called atmana. If it's to retain the heat, then that would be atmana. And the only solution would be that most of the challah should be uncovered, or there should be some gap between the silver foil and the challah. Let me explain why I'm saying this. We have a din of Shulchan Aruch that if you do hatmana, insulation is only if it's there to retain the heat. If it's lishma menachbarim, you're covering something so the mice shouldn't get to it, that's not called hatmana insulation. Now, this din is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, but it's not very clear. We have two forms of hatmana. We have hatmana b'davar she'ena moisif or b'davar ha-moisif havel. Something which retains heat or something which adds heat. And the two levels of hatmana. On Friday, we're not allowed to even do insulation. If on Friday insulate something in something which will add heat. On the Shabbos, even if it's just there to retain heat. There are two halachas, there's so many distinctions between them. This halacha that if it's to protect the item, it's not for heat purposes, not to preserve the heat, not to add heat, not to retain heat. It's purely to protect the item from the mice. Does that apply even if it's the actual insulation is adding heat? The Torah Shabbos wants to argue that this is a special halacha in something which is not moisif, it's maimid, it's retaining the heat. Then I don't care because after all you're doing it not to retain the heat, you're doing it to protect from the mice. But a hatmana where it's adding heat, when it's on top of the cholent pot, there's fire there under the pot. When you put your sulfur, the sulfur is getting heated from that fire, and that sulfur is considered something that adds heat, then maybe it would not be allowed to wrap the chalas. Most poskim do not make this distinction. In fact, the source brought is that this is like covering your pot. You're allowed to cover your pot. Now, clearly when you cover your pot, normally a pot is on the fire. You're allowed to cover a pot. Covering is not considered insulation. It's a cover. So if covering is okay, that applies to even something which is adding heat. Same thing will apply to the wrapping around the silfoil. There's a discussion about this, but it seems pretty clear. The Rashba talks about hatmana b'davar ha-moisif, insulating something which adds heat, and then he adds this condition that if it's there to protect from the mice, it's not a problem. This is a discussion a lot of people have with kugel, that you wrap the kugel in the silfoil and you drop it into the cholent. I'm not going to go into that whole topic, but clearly those who mention this idea that you're doing it only that the kugel shouldn't fall apart are clearly arguing. There might be other issues with that, which I don't want to go into right now. But all these achrim who talk about this topic clearly understand that hatmana, even b'davar ha-moisif, even if it's adding heat, it's not a problem if you're doing it for other external purposes. And even, by the way, if you're doing it for both purposes, you could both for heat and to protect it. Over here, you're doing it in order to it shouldn't dry up. That also could very well be okay if it's something which was made specifically for that. So you could argue silver foil is not made for that. It's not like a cover. Okay, we could talk about that. But either way, if most of it is not covered, when we're talking about a davar ha-moisif adding heat, the main thing is not about the top. The main thing is that most of it is wrapped around. If most of it is not wrapped around, that's never a problem. So let me just in order that we shouldn't get confused. If you're doing it not for heat purposes, you're doing that it shouldn't dry up, you don't want the moisture to come out of the challah to stay fresh, then it's not called hatmana. If you're doing it for heat purposes, then it needs to be mostly uncovered or have a visible gap. Which brings me to another Hilchah Shabbos question, and that is the issue of megis, mixing. Megis is a form of bishul, mixing something on the fire. Now, taking out with a spoon is another form of megis, is another form of mixing. Covering the pot is another form of mixing. So we have different forms of hagasa. Hagasa is an element of bishul, of cooking on Shabbos. So when people want to take out stuff from, want to ladle out from the cholent, that could be a form of hagasa, of megis. So we take the pot off the fire, and only then do we ladle things out. Strictly speaking, hagasa would only be if it's not fully cooked, because the idea of hagasa, of megis, is that you're helping the cooking process, you're aiding the process. If it's fully cooked, it wouldn't be a problem. But the kolbei has an opinion, and we've machmir with the kolbei's opinion that megis applies even if it's fully cooked. So we're machmir with that also. But to ladle out, we're not going to be machmir. Ladling out, it's off the fire and fully cooked, that we're not machmir that far. So now the question is, what means off the fire? If you're holding it above the fire, this could be relevant with sternos. There's a water pan underneath. The water pan is not touching the fire. So now you're having a pan on top of the water pan, but is that really considered it's on top of the fire? So Reb Chaim Noah writes, fire doesn't mean fire, means any place where it could cook. Other poskim seem to imply that's not the case. It's hard to really define the answer to this question because it's hard to understand to begin with. What could be the problem with megas? What is the problem of mixing? Especially when it's fully cooked. And especially when you're not even mixing it, you're just ladling out. So that becomes a bit hard to understand. There's actually some rayos in the Rishonim that imply that maybe it wouldn't be a problem if it's mamash not touching the fire. Practically speaking, people often want to ladle out stuff in the cholent, so they hold the cholent above the fire. Well, if you're holding it above the fire, it's right above the fire, that actually it's pretty hot over there, it could cook over there. So how's that different than the case of the sternos? Some people take it off completely and take it to the counter. They're still holding it in their hand because they want to put back the cholent. But if you're holding it above the fire or close to the fire, still many people are extremely lenient with that. And there's some strong argument for leniency in that case. Which brings me to a third topic. We mentioned that one of the elements of megas is the idea of covering. So that's clearly halacha, that covering a pot is a form of megas, it's a form of bishul. Putting a cover on top of a pot. That's clearly mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, that you're not allowed to cover, and you're also not allowed to add to the cover. There's a cover, and you want to add another cover on top of it, that's also a problem. It seems like this is mamash isser d'oraisa. The lashon amending Rishonim is chayav mishum avashel. It's you have to be very careful and understand the distinction between usser and the chayav. In Hilchos Shabbos, when we say usser, it means it's rabbinically forbidden. Chayav means it's biblically forbidden. Now, some of the Rishonim use the word usser. The Alter Rebbe actually writes the word usser. Some of the Rishonim use the word chayav. Some of the Rishonim write the word mavashel. Some write the word kimavashel. Kimavashel implies it's like cooking. Mavashel means it is cooking. It's hard. There's proof one way or another. On the one hand, it says if somebody did cover their pot, I'm told when it wasn't fully cooked, before we spoke about covering in terms of the isser of hatman, of insulation, that wasn't a problem, let it put a cover on the pot. But now we're talking about aiding the cooking process. So covering, which is a form of aiding the cooking process, and it's not fully cooked, and you put a cover, you're helping the cooking happen, that you're not allowed to do. Seems like for many places that it's min ha-Torah you're not allowed to do that. And one of the proofs that it's min ha-Torah, because it says that even if you did it by mistake, and even if after the fact, you can't have the food, which would imply that it's biblically forbidden, not only rabbinically forbidden. The real question is, this issur that you can't cover the pot is seemingly when it's not fully cooked. But we mentioned earlier the position of the kol boy that says that you're not allowed to mix or ladle even when it's fully cooked, which no one understands why, and it's a lot of questions on that. But that's what the kol boy says, and we're machmer. So maybe you shouldn't be able to cover the pot also when it's fully cooked. If covering is the same as ladling and mixing, so just like ladling and mixing were machmer even when it's fully cooked, maybe we shouldn't cover when it's fully cooked. Reb Chaim Noah writes about this. I didn't see this anywhere, he says. If this would really be a problem, then this would have been written somewhere clearly. Well, guess what? Many generations before Reb Chaim Noah, the Makor Chaim, the Chavis Yor, Reb Chaim Noah never saw this because the Makor Chaim was only printed a couple of years ago. The Makor Chaim seems to imply that you should be careful, chatchila, you shouldn't, even if it's fully cooked, not to cover the pot. Some later posts can talk about this, some say it's okay. Most of them say actually it's perfectly fine. There's some very strong evidence in the Alter Rebbe that it's, with covering at least, we're not that machmer. So with ladling, with mixing, we're machmer when it's fully covered. With ladling, well, machmer when it's, rephrase that. Mixing, we're machmer even when it's fully cooked. Ladling will be machmer, but only if it's still on the fire. Once it's off the fire, fully cooked, we won't particularly be concerned about ladling. Covering, the implication is only a problem when it's not fully cooked. Still, there are many that are machmer, and when they want to take out cholent on Shabbos, they take the pot off the fire, uncover it, and when they want to put the cholent back, following all the conditions, holding the cholent pot in your hand, they cover it before it gets onto the fire, or in order not to cover it, although it's fully cooked. And there's good reason to be machmer. First of all, the heter, when it's fully cooked, is only if you're sure everything is fully cooked. Sometimes it hasn't been fully cooked. Sometimes there are bones that haven't been fully cooked. And making the cooking of the bones happen faster, the bones are not fully soft. It could also be a problem. Sometimes there are droplets of liquid on the lid, and those droplets cool off very, very fast. And you're putting back the lid on, you're reheating those droplets. So there's good reasons to be machmer, although strictly speaking, it really wouldn't be a problem.
A brief ad, and we'll be right back to the podcast. Want to learn halacha in an organized, in-depth way? Machon Leman Yilmedu presents a wide range of halacha courses with top Magidei Shir, excellent course materials, and the option to join via Zoom from anywhere in the world. Spots fill up fast, so find the course that's right for you at lemanyilmedu.com.
Moving on to another question on the issue of Havilis, which is a very, very controversial topic. There is a halacha that an oinen, when a relative passed away, a father, a mother, brother, sister, etc., then the person who, before the burial, is considered an oinen, and an oinen is not allowed to do mitzvahs haseh, positive mitzvahs, is not allowed to make brachas, is not allowed to daven, etc., etc. So that makes it very difficult for people that really want to daven. And there's a particular heter called nimsel katafim. In the olden days, there were people their job was to carry the coffin on their shoulders, and they would do the burial. Once you give it into their hands, it's not in the hands of the oinen anymore, and then he could go daven, do everything that he wants to do. So, do we rely on the fact that today's day and age we have an organized chevra kadisha, and does that become nimsel katafim? So there's a big machlokes about this, because often the children or the family members didn't give away totally to the chevra kadisha. They're still involved on some level. They're going to the levaya. If they're going to the levaya, they're involved. However, there is a minig in many places, including in Chabad, that children do not go along to the levaya. They don't follow the mitzvah. They don't follow the aron. So if they don't follow the aron and they organize everything with chevra kadisha and everything has been worked out, then really it shouldn't be. They should be able to keep mitzvahs. The issue would only be where other relatives, children don't go follow the levaya of a father or a mother, other relatives do follow, then there would be this issue they don't have to keep mitzvahs. There is a lot more to be said about this topic. There's a lot of lack of clarity about this topic, and I don't want to go into all those details. The Noda B'Yehuda was machm when people accompany the mitzvah, but even he made some qualifications which was often not quoted. It's a difference if he's in a mitzvah or he's in a sealed aron. Today's day and age, often it's a sealed aron, and that might be totally different. The other thing is that today's day and age, when people going along, they're not doing anything. In a lot of chevra kadishas, they don't let you touch relatives, they don't let them touch, they don't let them bury, they don't let them add earth, they don't let them do a thing. And he would possibly was talking about when the person is involved on some level. There's good reasons, a lot of svaras to be lenient. The question really becomes, however, what does it mean they worked out everything with chevra kadisha? What if the person is still involved on some level? He could still call people. Now, you could always call people b'li gvul. Does that mean he's involved? Generally, it's in the chevra kadisha's responsibility. It's not you need to have those extra people there. Some people say that giving over means that the person had to do some involvement himself. In today's day and age, he doesn't do any involvement whatsoever. That's a massive chiddush as well. There's some strong arguments that katafim is when you give it over to the katafim, giving over to chevra kadisha is even more than giving over to the katafim, those people that in the olden days that would do the burial. There is a halacha that even if somebody's in another city, according to most of the Rishonim, and he's not involved in any level, he still follows the laws of aninas. And this is a question a lot of Achronim ask, why if chevra kadisha is doing something, the person loses the rules of aninas, but if he's in another city and his brothers or sisters are taking care of it, he does have the rules of aninas. There's a lot of distinctions. The main distinction is that chevra kadisha is a mesudadig thing. They're running the whole entire show. Over there, there's no real concern that there should be a problem. There's no hepech hakavod of the mace, that the chevra kadisha runs the entire thing from the beginning. Then there shouldn't be a problem. There's some people that want to argue, but it's against literally practically all the Rishonim, that Alter Rebbe or others don't hold of this heter of nimsel katafim. I mean, clearly nimsel katafim is a clear thing that if a oinen, once it's given over to the people that are in charge, not only they're allowed to eat meat and wine, but it also to start becoming chayiv and mitzvahs. And the Rebbe himself said the reason why he davened Ma'ariv in the year Tafshin Chafhei, he davened Ma'ariv after his mother passed away, because it was already in the hands of the chevra kadisha by the Rebbe. He didn't have to take care of it. He asked the chevra kadisha to take care of it. It's done. He doesn't have to go through all the details. When the Rebbe's brother passed away, the Rebbe followed a different position, which is another whole discussion, where the Rebbe said said since he's not going to the funeral, he's going to skip the stage of Aninus, not to be able to daven, not say Shema for such a long time. He's going to go straight into mourning, as though it's already after the burial, because there are many positions that say that people don't go to the Levaya, they start the Avelis right away. Talking about Avelis, I want to talk about just very, very briefly about a question relating to the halachas of the 9 days. We know the halacha is that if a person makes a siyum or sudas mitzvah, based on certain conditions, then the people that come to the siyum that normally would come because they're family, because they're related, because they're friends, could be part of the siyum. To come, to eat and meat and drink wine is a problem. So the question is, person's making about mitzvah, bris, he has waiters, he has a singer, he has a photographer. Are they also part of that group? In my opinion, it's pretty clear they're also part of it. The halacha is supposed to give food for the shamash for the waiter. So it says relative or friend, and then it says, except for those who come and going to eat and drink. Now, coming to eat and drink means because otherwise they wouldn't come. The waiter and the photographer, they normally come throughout the year. If you're making a simcha, you call them to be a photographer. And once they're coming, it's a menschlich thing, they should be there. They're actually better than other people in a way, better than relatives and friends, because they're coming, you need them there. The other people, maybe they'll come, maybe they won't come. I don't know, it's too hard for me. These people are coming for their parnas, but they're part of the makeup of the meal. You need to have a waiter there, you need to have a photographer, or at least you think you need to have one. So it's hard to say that they should not be included. And not only in the 9 days, but even the week of Tishba, which was much more severe, and over there in a bris, you only allowed to have a minyan mitzumtzum, and exactly a minyan plus immediate relatives. It seems to me that the photographer, the caterer, all the people that it's mentioned, it's not to give them to eat. Everybody's eating meat and they can't eat meat. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to start another topic, which is extremely, extremely controversial topic. We're not going to talk about this at length, but I do want to mention this issue. There's a big shaila nowadays. There's an argument that our dishes do not absorb as they used to absorb in the past. And therefore, when somebody cooks fleishiks in a pot, the concern is that the fleishik taste absorbed in the pot. And therefore, now if you cook milchiks, the milchiks will receive the fleishik taste. In our dishes, you don't feel a fleishik taste when you cook milchiks afterwards, or you don't feel the treif taste afterwards. And that could really create a whole new discussion. There's been very little discussed about this topic. I wrote a whole article about it. I do want to mention that everything on this podcast, you could, a lot of things on the podcast, you could see later the links on the website, on the asktherav.com website. I wrote about this, it's number 53120, asktherav.com. You can look about it at length. That there's some strong arguments to say. It's to say that, no, that we can't change the halacha, that doesn't make any sense. The halacha is based on facts. Now, if there are scientific experiments that prove that today, and there are some scientific experiments that today the taste is not absorbed in the metal, so I'm not going to say because of that you shouldn't kasher, but that could be an extra argument that if a person did not kasher and they cooked something afterwards, there might be certain cases where we can argue that because anyhow there's no taste absorbed in their milchiks now, it could be mutter. This is a discussion for Rabbanim to have. You have to look through all the different experiments. The question is not whether we rely on the science. The question is whether it's not about halacha changing. The question is what type of experiment needs to be made to say that our dishes are done differently. It doesn't make sense to say the rule of loy plug, that once that was in the time of Chazal, because there's some strong evidence that every generation they went and they did practical assessments and scientific tests to see whether there's still a taste. We physically don't taste normally. If you wash your dishes properly, you cook something in a pot, you don't feel anything afterwards, that taste going into the next food. So again, this is not a psak, this is waiting for the Gedolei Yisrael to talk about this. But again, I'm just mentioning this as an interesting topic, and you can look up all the details more, the lumdus about it, on the website. Besudas Tevis Koltov.
Join the global halacha learning revolution of the Laman Yilmedu Institute and bring increased brachos into your home. For details about the various learning programs, visit our website, lamanyilmedu.com. That's LEMAANYILMEDU.com.